Ready to go? Okay.
Yes, we are.
Hello.
Actually, everyone is already in the waiting room. Yeah, sorry, out of the waiting room. So everyone is already attending.
So we can start now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, hello, Venerable Sangye Khadro. How are you?
I'm well. Hello.
Okay, so I'm supposed to introduce you because we are very old friend, very old friend. You met the Dharma in 73 and you got ordained in 74 in Bodh Gaya, I think, if I remember well. And I met you in 77. I met you in 74, sorry, November 74, when I came to Copan for the first time, and you were already ordained, very shy, very always in the dome, typing for Nick Ribush, I remember, and typing Lama Zopa Rinpoche and the Lama Yashi teachings. And we didn't see you so much because you were the whole day typing. I remember that. And you joined us in the community. We were a monks and nuns community in Copan, very happy and taking teaching from our masters. And then you got sent to the West in 78. And I got sent to the West in 78. You went to Manjushri Institute, and I went to France to organize some teachings. And I think you studied a lot at Manjushri Institute. Then you went to Vajrayana Institute because we started Dorje Pamo community, the first one, Dorje Pamo 1, and you did contribute a lot, and but it didn't work so well. And then you were sent. I think you were sent to the east, to Singapore. I think I think you got sent to Singapore to be the main teacher, and we kind of lost track of each other. And then when you came to Lama Tsongkhapa Institute to follow the master program, the second one, yes. Because you were in Europe, I started to invite you to Kalachakra Center, and you led few retreats at the retreat center, and you gave teaching at the Paris Center as well, and then we reconnect. And so now you're in America, and Zoom is there, so we still can. You can still provide to us a lot of teachings, and we are very happy to welcome you today. Really, really happy. Thank you so much, because your teaching, people know about all the books you published and the vivid teaching you can give and your knowledge. And thank you so much for providing this to us.
Thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth, my old friend. And hello to all of you attending this course. Is this working? No, it's not working. Huh? You can hear okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm very happy to have this opportunity to teach this course. It's one of my favorite topics. And so what we're going to be doing is having sessions during which I will talk part of the time. We'll also have a chance to do some meditation on what I'm talking about, and also questions. If you have questions, because of the language situation, it's best if you can send your questions to Arnaud. I think you have the email address. You can send your questions, and he can translate them and send them to me, and then I will answer them in a later session. We'll try that and see how that works. But we may also have just spontaneous questions if, if you have them. So to begin with, we're going to recite a couple of prayers. This is traditional in Buddhist courses, Buddhist retreats. To start with some prayers, we'll do the prayer of refuge and bodhicitta. And we'll do it here in the Sravasti Abbey. We have a chantable version of the refuge and bodhicitta prayer. So we're going to chant that together. And I think you'll probably have the prayer on the screen that you can follow. So we'll do refuge and bodhicitta prayer. And then also the prayer of the four immeasurable thoughts, which helps us to generate really positive thoughts and feelings towards all sentient beings. And then we'll recite a few mantras of the Buddha, maybe just three mantras of Shakyamuni Buddha. And you can imagine Buddha sending light, filling your body and mind and clearing away any disturbing thoughts or emotions and helping your mind to be in a positive state for what we're doing. And then we'll take a few more moments just to make sure we do have a positive motivation for joining this course.
I take refuge
Till I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings not be separated from sorrowless bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and greed.
Ayata
Om Mune Mune Maha Mune Soha. Tayata Om Mune Mune Maha Mune Soha. Tayata Om Mune Mune Maha Mune Soha. So when we listen to teachings on the Dharma or engage in any Dharma activity or any activity at all, it's ideal if we have as our motivation the wish to benefit others. If you're familiar with bodhicitta, the aspiration to become a Buddha, fully enlightened, to be able to benefit all living beings, if that's something familiar to you and you're comfortable with it, then you can bring that into your mind as your motivation for being here. But if you're not familiar with that or not comfortable with that, then try to at least feel the wish to benefit others. We all do feel that way, at least sometimes when we hear about problems in the world, war, hunger, poverty, depression, and so on. We feel the wish that that suffering could be relieved and that everyone everywhere could be happy and peaceful and free of suffering. So see if you can bring into your mind that kind of feeling, that kind of wish for beings, human beings and other kinds of beings, to be free of all their suffering, all their problems, and to have genuine peace and happiness. And then you can connect that with what we're doing during this course. You can think that you're here listening, learning, so that you can make a contribution to the peace and happiness of others and the world and help to relieve its suffering. So I started teaching courses on this topic about 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, I think, because I know that a lot of people suffer from disturbing emotions. I myself in my life had lots of experience of painful, disturbing emotions in my mind. And this is one of the things I've found most beneficial about the Buddha's teachings. It was just such a wonderful experience to learn about the mind and about emotions, and to learn that it was possible to change these disturbing emotions, decrease them, and increase the positive emotions. And so I had the thought, it would be really helpful to share this this kind of information with more people, even those who are not necessarily Buddhist and may never want to become a Buddhist, or may have difficulty accepting some of the aspects of Buddhism, like rebirth, reincarnation, and so on. But this material on the mind and emotions and how to work with disturbing emotions is universal, and you don't have to be a Buddhist. You don't have to believe in rebirth to be able to benefit from it. And so I started teaching courses that would just share the Buddhist methods for working with disturbing emotions to make them more accessible to others. And so I've taught this course a number of times, and sometimes I do it in a retreat situation for 1 week or 10 days where we have a lot of time to go through all the material and meditate on it and so on. But I can also squeeze it into a shorter period of time, like the weekend, so you can at least get some idea of what is available in the Buddhist teachings. So first, I'll talk about the Buddhist view of emotions using. I'll try not to use too much technical language and use just more practical terminology that can make sense to anybody, hopefully. And then we'll look at methods we'll start looking at different methods for, how we can work on our painful, disturbing emotions. So, according to Buddhism, emotions are aspects of our mind. And the mind itself in Buddhism is like a really big subject. There's a lot of material. But just to explain briefly what mind is according to Buddhism, because it's quite different than views of mind in the West. So according to Buddhism, mind is, we could call it a kind of energy, but it's not physical. It's not at all something physical or material. So it's not any part of our mind. It's of our brain, our body. Sorry, it's not any part of our body, not any part of our brain, not even a product of our brain, as many in the West believe. It's a different kind of energy altogether, non-material, non-physical. And it's that aspect of us that that thinks, knows, feels, perceives, and it's just basic awareness. So there's many different parts of our mind, many different aspects of our mind. It isn't just one single thing like an organ sitting inside of us, always the same. But rather it's more like a stream. They sometimes use the analogy of a stream or a river. If you think about that, like the Seine River, it's constantly flowing and constantly changing and never exactly the same from one moment to the next. And it's made up of, like a river, a stream is made up of many, many particles, tiny particles that can be broken down further and further. So it's a little bit similar with our mind. Our mind isn't just one thing that's always the same, but it's, more like a stream made up of different experiences, different aspects of experience, like thoughts, emotions, and perceptions, and memories, and so on. And it's always changing, never the same from one moment to the next. And the mind is always there. It isn't like something that sometimes goes off, like at night when we go to sleep. It's not that our mind switches off, as we know. We usually have dreams. So our mind is continuing to go and experience things even when we're asleep and having dreams. And even in a state of non-dream sleep, the mind is still there, according to Buddhism. It's still there. It's still present, experiencing something, even if it's just darkness. And the same with coma, person in a coma. They still have a mind. The mind is still there, but it's just in a very, very deep state, not consciously aware. So that's just a very brief introduction to the mind, but there's a lot more in the Buddhist teachings about the mind. And so emotions are aspects of our mind. They are parts of our mind. And in a very broad way, in a very general way, we can talk about two kinds of emotions. Some that are more helpful, positive, like love and compassion. And when we say these are helpful or positive, what that means is they are conducive for happiness. Like everybody wants to be happy. Everyone's trying to be happy, to have good experiences, satisfying experiences. And Buddhism acknowledges that and also says everyone deserves to be happy. Everyone should be happy. And so some of our emotions or mental states are conducive for happiness, like love or loving kindness. So that is where we care about others. We want them to be happy. We do what we can to make them happy. So we all know that experience. It's what we feel for our family members and our friends and pets and certain people, certain beings, we have these very warm, caring feelings for, and act towards those people and beings in a way that's good for them, makes them happy, makes them feel good. So it's easy to see with that state of mind, love, that it brings happiness. So it's, good for others. They feel good. We all feel good when someone shows us loving kindness. But it's also good for the one who's feeling that, for the experiencer of love. It's a very beautiful state of mind, a very wonderful state of mind. We feel joyful when we're feeling love. So that's just an example of a positive emotion or a positive state of mind. And again, the reason it's called positive is because it brings good results, good experiences for oneself and for others. On the other hand, some of our emotions are what could be called negative or unhelpful or unskillful or even harmful. So what we mean by that is those are emotions that have the opposite effect. Instead of bringing happiness and peace and good experiences, they are the cause of unhappiness and problems and even suffering, terrible suffering. So one of the best examples of that is anger. And I'll talk more about that later. There's different levels or degrees of anger, from just a mild feeling of irritation or annoyance, all the way up to strong hatred that can even motivate destructive actions like killing, war, and so on. So there's a whole range of different levels of anger. But I think it's pretty easy to see that that state of mind is the cause of unhappiness and even suffering. Somebody gets very angry and then they get totally under the control of their anger, they can act it out and even commit murder or commit other kinds of physical behavior that is harmful to others. And of course, things like war and terrorism, those actions which bring incredible suffering. If we look at where they're coming from, we can definitely find anger and hatred in there. So they're harmful for others, but they're also harmful for the one experiencing them. Because if we observe our mind when we're feeling anger, hatred, any of those kind of feelings, it's very unpeaceful, very painful. It's not at all a peaceful, happy state of mind. It's very disturbed, agitated, troubled, and it's painful. So those emotions or states of mind that produce suffering, unhappiness, problems for others, as well as for oneself, are this other category that can be called negative emotions or disturbing emotions. So during this course, I'm mainly going to talk about those. Those are the problematic ones. Those are the ones we need to learn how to work on. But in the course of doing that, we will also be looking at positive emotions, because by developing more positive emotions, like more love and compassion, that itself will help to decrease the negative ones like anger and hatred. So according to Buddhism, we have everybody, with the exception of enlightened beings, but all of us ordinary beings, we have both types of emotions in our mind. We have some negative ones, but we also have positive ones. And Buddhism says that the real nature of our mind is pure, and it can be compared to water. When you have water coming out of a spring in the ground, a very deep pure spring, then that water is very pure, doesn't have chemicals or dirt or other kinds of unhealthy things in it. So you can just drink it, and it's very good for you. But sometimes water can get polluted by chemicals or dirt, and so on. And then it becomes unhealthy, not good to drink. It needs to be purified. So our mind is similar to pure water in the sense that its nature is pure, clear, like pure water. But us ordinary beings have within our mind the pollution of disturbing emotions, disturbing thoughts and emotions like anger and attachment and so on. And Buddhism has a whole explanation of why this is the case. Where do these things come from? Basically, they come from ignorance about the true nature of things, not understanding reality, the reality of ourself, the reality of others, the reality of the world. So we're kind of blind to or confused about the true nature of things. And it's because of that that these various disturbing emotions rise in our mind. But the good thing is that the disturbing emotions are not permanent. They're not fixed aspects of our mind. And they're not things that are going to be there forever. We can see that for ourselves. Even now in our experience, we can see that there are times when we have anger. There's anger in our mind. There's times when it's not there. So it comes and goes in our mind rather than being a permanent fixture that's always there. And it's possible to work on our mind and reduce the disturbing emotions so they don't come up as much, and eventually get to the point where they're gone forever. Like in the case of a Buddha never gets angry. In the past, a Buddha was an ordinary person like ourselves and got angry and had other disturbing emotions. But the Buddha worked on his mind and found a way to cure his mind of the disturbing emotions. And then he realized that now everybody can do this. And so that's why he taught. He gave the teachings that he did to show us how we can reduce and then eliminate our disturbing emotions. So this is definitely possible. And in fact, this is the essence of Buddhism. I've heard His Holiness the Dalai Lama sometimes talk about this, that the essence of Buddhism is working on our mind to bring about a transformation of our mind. And the meaning of transforming our mind is to reduce the negative, disturbing emotions like anger and so on, make those weaker, lessen them, and increase the positive aspects of the mind like love and compassion and so on. And this takes time, unfortunately. It's not something we can do immediately right away. The Buddha worked a long time to get his mind to this state of enlightenment. But it is possible. It is something doable if we work at it. But we can start to see some change in a year, maybe less. But we have to be careful not to have high expectations. This is a big mistake that I had when I first started learning Buddhism. I heard about, these negative emotions like anger and greed and so on and so forth. And I had this strong wish to completely eliminate them and not have them anymore. And I kind of expected that would happen quickly. And I got pretty frustrated when they were still there, even after a few months or a year. They're still there. Why don't they go away? And so, the Tibetan lamas often say, slowly, slowly, dear. And Lama Yeshe would, I think, even talked about mushrooms, like mushrooms grow very quickly. And he said, you know, mental transformation isn't like growing mushrooms. Isn't like, you know, overnight you can suddenly see you're a totally different person. So it takes time. So this is important to learn. Otherwise we can get frustrated and maybe even give up if it's not happening as quickly as we want. Okay, so what does it mean to say working on our negative emotions, our disturbing emotions? What is that involved? So just in my own experience and learning from others as well, what I've noticed is there's two ways of dealing with disturbing emotions that are not helpful and that we should try to avoid, steer clear of. So one is suppressing them. So this is where, for example, there may be anger in your mind, but you pretend it's not there. You ignore it, avoid it, deny it, suppress it. You might even force yourself to smile and say, I'm not angry. So you might present this kind of appearance to others, but even to yourself. I know this very well because this is something I've done my entire life. Partly because of my family situation, you know, it wasn't really okay to show our emotions in my family. So I had to learn to suppress them. So suppressing emotions is something that probably everybody does at least sometimes. And it's good to notice if and when that is happening. And to check if this is a helpful method or not. So I think it's not helpful because, for one thing, the emotion doesn't go away. It's not a solution. It just gets kind of pushed down. And if you keep doing that again and again and again, you might get, it's like a pressure cooker. Yeah. That energy doesn't go away and it might build up and one day you explode. Like if you know, continuously have anger, aversion towards a particular person, and you just keep suppressing it and denying it. But, you know, one day, like they say, the straw that broke the camel's back, you know, the one last thing happens and you explode and spew out all this anger towards that person you've been holding on to for months or years. So it doesn't go away. The emotion doesn't go away by suppressing it. And I've heard it can also lead to health problems. Like if you keep suppressing negative emotions, it can affect your health. You can have adverse health consequences, even mental health as well, that may be damaged by suppressing emotions. But this is something to explore for yourself. Okay, this is just, I'm just sharing my experience, but you need to check for yourself if this is true. And then the other unhelpful way of dealing with disturbing emotions is the opposite, and that is to let them out, act them out. So that's, for example, if you're feeling angry and you just immediately express it in your words, you know, shout, swear, speak harshly, or even in your actions, you know, hitting someone, doing something physically harmful to someone, or slamming doors or breaking windows or whatever, the different ways people act out their anger. So that also needs to be investigated. Is that helpful or not? I heard in the past some psychologists, some therapists would encourage people to act out their anger because they recognized suppressing it wasn't helpful. So they said, just act it out, let it out. But then I heard that it was found that that didn't help either, because then it becomes habitual, becomes a habit. And then it becomes easier and easier to do it. And the worst case scenario would be, you know, you're acting it out again and again, maybe in more and more violent, destructive ways. And eventually you might actually do something really negative, like killing someone. And then of course it's harmful to others and harmful to oneself. So again, that's something we probably all do at certain times, even if we don't want to. Sometimes the emotion comes up and it's just so strong and we can't control it, and it kind of comes out in our actions, our behavior, our speech. So these are, it's good to look at that. It's good to look at our own experience of these two ways that we respond when disturbing emotions arise, and check, you know, are they helpful or not helpful? So what I've come to in my studies and my practice of Buddhism is that the ideal way to work with disturbing emotions, we could call it a kind of middle way between those two. Those two are like two extremes: suppressing on the one hand, acting out on the other hand. Those are like extremes. And so a middle way would be to acknowledge the presence of a disturbing emotion in your mind. So, for example, if anger is there in your mind, you accept it, you acknowledge it, you're not denying it, suppressing it, pretending it's not there. So in that way, you avoid the first problem of suppression. But then you work on that emotion using some kind of method or technique or antidote. And again, there's lots of these in Buddhism, and I'll be sharing some with you during this weekend. So these are like, yeah, countermeasures, antidotes, remedies, tools. You can use whatever word you want, but they're ways that you can work on that particular painful, disturbing emotion, such that you can either let go of it, you can get to where it just kind of passes on its own, or better yet, you can transform your mind, transform your mental state, so that instead of feeling that negative, disturbing emotion, you can replace it with something positive. So instead of being angry at somebody, for example, you can feel compassion, love, kindness, the wish to reach out and help them rather than punch them. So that's definitely possible. It's not easy. It does take time to learn how to do that. But in time, if you work with these different methods, you can learn how to do it. And it even gets to the point where it's kind of spontaneous, just your natural way of being. So in the past, maybe you were a very angry person and acting out your anger a lot, but you can get to the point where you're much more patient, easygoing, and more kind and helpful, even to people you used to get angry at. So it is definitely possible if you're willing to put in the time and energy to get to that point. So the benefit of this approach, the middle way, is that we can avoid creating suffering, problems for others and also for ourselves, because we'll be less likely to be controlled by our disturbing emotions and then act them out in ways that create suffering. And so our life will in general be more peaceful, and our relationships with others will go better. We'll have fewer problems. So that's the general approach. And then some steps to help us in developing this way of working with emotions. So one step is that we need to be able to recognize and identify the emotions in our mind. And that's not always so easy to do. I know for myself, sometimes there's just all these thoughts and feelings swirling around inside of you. And it's almost like being lost in a jungle, and you don't know where you are and you don't know what's going on. And so to alleviate that problem, like in my own experience, I just found it really helpful to learn Buddhist teachings, because there is so much information about the mind and about the different emotions. In fact, there's a whole subject called Lorik in Tibetan, which means mind and awareness. And that's kind of a scientific explanation of the mind, what it is, how it works, and then the different aspects of the mind, some of which are called afflictive emotions or disturbing emotions. Those include anger and attachment and jealousy. And so those are the ones that bring suffering and problems to ourselves and others. And then there's other mental factors, mental states that are normally called virtuous, because they're the source of happiness and peace and positive experiences and help us to progress along the path. Because our real goal in Buddhism is enlightenment, becoming enlightened to benefit all living beings. But mainly what's involved in becoming enlightened is transforming our mind, because we have the potential within our mind to become enlightened. This is what we call Buddha nature. And but there's a lot of obstacles, a lot of things in the way of this Buddha nature being able to manifest and be actualized. And so a lot of the process of becoming enlightened is to clear away these obstacles, these hindrances that prevent our Buddha nature from manifesting. And mainly they are these afflictions, afflictive emotions. And so we do need to learn about them, be able to identify them in our experience, and then learn the various antidotes to overcome them. And so, yeah, learning Buddhist teachings is very helpful for then being able to look at our mind and recognize what's going on in our mind and what we need to work on. I was just thinking about the first time I met Lama Zopa Rinpoche. I was in India. That was in 1973, and and someone helped me have an audience or interview with him, private visit with him. And I asked him the question, what is the Dharma? Because I'd been going to classes at the Tibetan library. I was still very, very new. And I kept hearing that term Dharma, but I didn't really understand what it meant. And I was too shy to ask questions in class. So I thought all these knowledgeable people around me, what will they think if I ask such a dumb question? So anyway, I asked the question to Lama Zopa Rinpoche. And he gave a very long answer, most of which I don't remember. But one thing he did say that really stuck in my mind, because I thought, wow, that's amazing. He said, the Dharma is like a mirror for our mind. Just as we use an ordinary mirror, like the one hanging in the bathroom, to look at our face and our body and our hair and, see if there's anything that's messed up, needs to be fixed up. But an ordinary mirror doesn't show us our mind. It only shows us the external aspects of our body. So the Dharma is like a mirror for the mind, because it enables us to see our mind and what needs to be fixed up, what isn't working, what isn't so good, and what needs to be changed in our mind, something like that. And I just thought, wow, that's really cool. And I wrote it down and I stuck it on the wall next to my bed. I really wanted to remember that. So yeah, so that's the teachings of the Buddha, provide that mirror to be able to see our inner world, which we can't see in a glass mirror. What's really going on inside of our mind, inside of our heart, our thoughts, our feelings, and be able to recognize those things that are problematic, that are painful, that are, you know, the cause of suffering for ourselves. And also, if we don't know how to manage them, then they also become the cause of suffering for others and for the world. All the wars, all the conflicts, all the terrible things that people do to each other and to the environment, if we look at where those are coming from, they all have their origin in disturbing aspects of the mind, like anger, hatred, greed, selfishness, jealousy, pride, arrogance, and so on. So, yeah, so as the Dalai Lama said, this is the real essence of Buddhism, recognizing these aspects of the mind that are the cause of suffering, working on overcoming them. So yeah, learning the teachings helps us have a better understanding of what aspects of the mind are afflictive, are disturbing, are the cause of suffering, so that then we can recognize them in ourselves. And also, the practice of meditation is very helpful. For example, meditation on the breath, mindfulness meditation, walking meditation. So these kind of practices help us to slow down and not be so focused on the outer world, what's going on out there, and activities that we're doing, what we have to do next, what we have to do tonight, tomorrow, and so on. So much of the time our mind is occupied with those kinds of things. And so then we don't have as much time or space to be able to recognize what's really going on in our mind at deeper levels. And so doing a regular practice of meditation, ideally every day, if you can, at least do some practice of meditation every day, it helps you to slow down so that you can see your inner world more clearly. Like they use the analogy of a pool of water. And if the water is agitated, something is stirring the water, making it agitated, then you can't see through the water down to the bottom and what's down on the bottom of the pool. But if the water becomes calm, if nothing stirs it, then it becomes calm, and then it becomes very clear. You can see very clearly what's on the bottom, stones or tiles or whatever. So it's similar with our mind, learning to slow down our mind and become more aware of our mind helps us recognize when there are disturbing emotions in our mind. So that's the first step. First step is being able to recognize the disturbing emotions. Then it's also very important to have a healthy, balanced attitude about emotions. And what that means is, ideally, it's not easy, but ideally to not have attachment nor aversion. So we may have attachment to certain emotions or, states of mind, and want to cling to them and want to have more of them, and then become disappointed when they're not there. So that's one thing that can happen. But another thing that can happen is aversion to the unpleasant emotions like the anger, the jealousy, the Yeah, the painful emotions. So when they arise in our mind, we may react to them with aversion, with dislike. And then this is problematic. And in fact, one thing that happens is the kind of language that's used to refer to the disturbing emotions. Some Buddhist teachers and some books use words like negative. I used it myself. Negative emotions. Some may even say evil. They use the word evil, bad. And so these terms carry, the connotation that, oh, if I have that in my mind, then I'm a bad person. So we may react in that way. If there's anger in my mind, that means I'm bad, I'm evil. And so then that might lead us to suppression. That might cause us to suppress. I don't want to be a bad person. I want to be a good person. And so when we notice disturbing emotions, then we may suppress them, pretend they're not there. But again, that doesn't work. They don't go away. Another thing that happens is feelings of guilt, shame, self-criticalness, beating yourself up, hating yourself, also fear, anxiety. So these kind of reactions when we notice disturbing emotions in our mind are not helpful. They happen a lot, especially in the West. I don't know so much about Asian people. They don't seem to have those problems. You've probably heard this story. The Dalai Lama was once having a conference with a number of Western Buddhist teachers. And one of the teachers talked about how when teaching loving kindness meditation to people, you need to teach them to have love for themselves as well as others, because so many people don't love themselves. So many people hate themselves. And apparently when the Dalai Lama heard that, he was really surprised, and it was like a new thing, a new idea that people hate themselves. So now he knows quite well that that is the case. And so when he teaches, he does talk about the need to have love for yourself and compassion for yourself, just as you do for others. But it doesn't seem to me to be such a common problem in Tibetan culture or some Asian cultures, but it's very common in the West. Many, many people in the West have negative feelings towards themselves. So, and so this can happen if we see certain emotions as being negative or bad or evil. And then when we notice those in ourselves, then we can have these feelings of hatred or criticalness towards oneself, or guilt or shame. So be on the lookout for those reactions and know that they're not helpful. That isn't helpful. And it just makes things worse. It's like, if let's say there's anger in the mind. I mean, anger itself is already a problem. It's already painful and disturbing and, not a pleasant experience at all. So that you already got that problem of anger in the mind. And then on top of that, if you're judging yourself for being angry, you're beating yourself up, you're feeling bad, feeling ashamed, guilty, and so on. That's just adding more layers of problem to your mind. It's exacerbating your suffering, increasing your suffering rather than relieving it. And it takes time. I have this problem myself. I have this tendency to beat myself up. And even though I know it's not good, it's not helpful, it still happens. It's such a habit. So it's very difficult to break that habit. But at least if we can be aware of it, notice it happening when it's happening, and know that that isn't the way to go. That's not the route I want to follow. and I'll talk more later about some things we can do about that. But yeah. So this is what I'm trying to say here, is that the ideal attitude about emotions is neither aversion, hating them, and then hating yourself for having them, nor attachment, clinging to them. I forgot what I was going to say. Oh yeah, another thing that tends to happen is identification with emotions. I think this is just an automatic thing that happens in our mind. When an emotion comes up, we automatically feel, I am that. We even say it in our language. I am angry. I am jealous. And it can seem as if I and anger are one and the same. And that's not true. According to Buddhism, it isn't true. We are not anger. We are not jealousy. These are just aspects of the mind that arise sometimes. They're not always there. They are there maybe a few seconds, a few minutes, but they don't last. They're not permanent fixtures in our mind. Like I was saying before, they come and go. Later, we'll do a little meditation to see how this is the case. But there's a really nice analogy that I love. This comes in the Buddhist teachings, that our mind is like the sky or like space. It's that, if you think about when there's no clouds, no pollution in the sky, it's like a perfectly clear, pristine sky. So the basic nature of our mind is like that, in the sense that it's clear and pure and spacious and full of potential. And then the emotions, all emotions and thoughts and so on, are like clouds. So just as clouds aren't permanent parts of the sky, when there's certain conditions in the atmosphere, the clouds form and they're there for a while, but they eventually pass away, sometimes very quickly. I've had the experience sometimes looking at a cloud in the sky and just in front of my eyes, it disappears. Other times they may last longer. They may last for days. But even while they're there, they're changing. Yeah, they're always changing, and eventually they pass. And so it's similar with thoughts and emotions in our mind. They come and then go. They arise because of causes and conditions. They're there for a period of time, maybe a second or two or three, or maybe a few hours, but eventually they're gone. They're not permanent, always there. So that's a very helpful analogy to use with regard to thoughts and emotions, especially the disturbing ones. And you can even train yourself to say, instead of saying, I am angry, to say, there is anger in my mind. That makes a huge difference. Yeah, because then you're not identifying with it. You're not feeling that is me, because that seems to give it more permanence, more solidity, and it will probably last longer. Whereas if you say anger is in my mind and you have some understanding of the mind and how it's changing all the time, then it gives it the chance to disappear more quickly. And just to illustrate that, once I was teaching this course on working with disturbing emotions, and there was one woman, a mother, who had a teenage daughter that would often be naughty, not do what her mother told her to do, or do the opposite what her mother told her not to do, and so on. And she would get angry. She would just explode with anger at her daughter, which she didn't like, but she didn't know how to manage that. So after hearing this method, the next time she found herself with her daughter was doing something naughty, and the mother could feel the anger starting to come up in her mind. And she just said to herself, anger is in my mind, anger is in my mind, anger is in my mind, silently. And she was able to manage it. She didn't explode. And she was so happy. She came to me, she was all excited. She learned some way of dealing with her anger rather than exploding. So, and another time I was in Italy and teaching in one of the cities there in a weekend course, and the same topic. And I explained this method, and then we had a break. And then after the break, one man said that during the break, he went out to put a parking coupon on his car, because that's what you have to do in cities in Europe, have a parking coupon. And so when he got to his car, he found that he was too late. The parking, what do they call it? Police had already come and given him a ticket. And he stood there and he said, anger is in my mind, anger is in my mind. And he said, normally he would have exploded in that kind of situation, but that helped him to remain calm, and the anger did subside. He was able to avoid exploding. So that's a very helpful method with any kind of disturbing emotion. It takes some time to learn how to do it, but it is helpful. And the real point is to recognize that these emotions are not who we are. They are not permanent parts of us. They are just aspects of our mind that arise at certain moments because of causes and conditions that we don't always have any control over, like your teenage daughter not doing what you asked her to do, or the police coming and putting a ticket on your car when you're just 1 minute late, or something like that. There's always these circumstances that happen in our life other than the way we want things to happen. So yeah, these things happen, and that can be one condition to trigger our disturbing emotions like anger or fear or anxiety. So if we understand that these emotions are temporary, transitory, they arise due to causes and conditions, they're not permanent, they're not going to last forever, they're like clouds in the sky. So keeping that in mind, learning or training yourself to see your emotions in that way is very helpful. So the emotion will go away more quickly, and you won't identify with it, and you'll have fewer problems with your disturbing emotions. I remember another story someone told me about using this for depression. She had problems with depression, and sometimes she'd be depressed for weeks. So after hearing this, she woke up one morning feeling kind of depressed and just said to herself, depression is in my mind, depression is in my mind. She said it went away more quickly than it would normally do. So it can be helpful for any different kind of disturbing emotion. Also, it's helpful to understand that we don't choose to have these disturbing emotions. It's not our choice. Nobody chooses to be depressed or to get angry. They just arise because of causes and conditions. And again, the more you study Buddhism, the more you learn about the various causes and conditions that are behind the disturbing emotions. And the more you understand that, that also helps to make sense of them, and also to not blame yourself. It's not our fault. It's not that we want to be this way, we chose to be this way, we're a bad person because we have these disturbing emotions. So according to Buddhism, we have these emotions because we're ordinary unenlightened beings. We haven't yet worked on our mind to free ourselves from them. And they're all based on ignorance, not knowing the true nature of things. And that's been in our mind forever, always. We didn't choose to be this way. It's just we came this way. and we inherit these disturbing emotions from our previous lives, not from our parents. So we can't blame our parents for them, but rather our mind existed before this life, in another life, another body, and before that, another one, and another one, another one. So in our past lives, we had anger and attachment and ignorance and all these disturbing emotions. So our mind, right from the start of this life, it has these disturbing emotions. You can see them in babies. You don't have to learn how to be angry or how to be attached. It's already there in their mind from day one. So we can't blame anybody else for them, but we also can't blame ourselves. It doesn't help to blame ourselves for them. It's better not to blame anybody. We don't need to blame. Just understand what are the causes and conditions that give rise to them, and learn to work with those causes and conditions, change them, and eventually we can create the causes and conditions to make them disappear, to make them go away forever and never come back, like the Buddha did. It is possible. Okay, so then the first step is to learn to recognize the disturbing emotions when they're there in the mind, and have a balanced attitude towards them, neither attached to them nor averse to them. It's not easy to do. I still have tendency to dislike negative emotions, disturbing emotions, but they can also be very helpful if we know, if we learn how to work with them. They can be tremendously helpful to develop greater understanding of ourselves, and also then understanding of others. Like just my own case, I had a lot of anger since I was a little kid, and I didn't like being angry, and for a long time I was suppressing it. Even after I started learning Buddhism, I kept suppressing my anger, pretending I wasn't angry. But finally I realized I had to acknowledge it and work with it. And that was like a huge switch. Prior to that, I really hated anger and I was almost fighting with it. But when I, changed to accepting it, acknowledging it, working with it, it became kind of exciting. It's so interesting to look at the mind and what's going on in the mind, and learn how to work with something like anger. And it's also very helpful then when dealing with other people, because when I was suppressing my anger, I couldn't bear to be around anybody else who was angry. I was frightened. And had a lot of aversion. And so when I started working on my own anger, I became less afraid of anger in general, and I could be around other people who were angry and have more compassion for them, more understanding. It's like, oh yeah, I know what that's like. I know what that feels like. It's really difficult. It's really painful. So I was able to have more compassion for them. And then also when you get more skill at working on your own disturbing emotions, then you can be more helpful to others. You can suggest, if they're open, of course, you don't want to force them, but if they're open to suggestions, how things they could do, then you can offer things that you've learned in your experience that could help others learn how to deal with their anger. So then you become more compassionate, more helpful to others. So yeah, I find it a really fascinating subject, working with emotions. Yeah, so then identifying, acknowledging, and then applying antidotes. And there's lots of different methods. We don't have time in this weekend to go into all of them. There's whole books about anger, for example. Whole books full of different tools, different methods you can use to work with anger. But anyway, I'll mention a few different methods, and we can practice them together. So this approach is a bit like being your own therapist, noticing your disturbing emotions and then working on them on your own, like in meditation. And some people may be able to do that just fine. Some people may find it difficult. They may feel the need for help, outside help. So you can talk to teachers, spiritual teachers, or more experienced practitioners of Buddhism. In some cases, you may even need to seek help from a therapist. So it is good to be careful when choosing a therapist. Best to try to find someone whose way of working and techniques and so on are compatible with Buddhism, rather than encouraging you to go out and act out your anger. Some methods are very helpful. For example, EMDR, which is becoming much more known and practiced. Many people practicing it. I think it's completely compatible with Buddhism. EMDR, you don't know what it is. What does it stand for? Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Yeah, it's long term. So EMDR is easier. You can look it up on the internet. Yeah, it's a method that was discovered accidentally by one therapist. And there's different ways of practicing it, but it's particularly helpful for people who've been through a traumatic experience or other disturbing life experiences. So they've used it on veterans, war veterans, rape victims, victims of abuse, child abuse, and so on. And it's very, very helpful. I don't know the whole science behind it, so look it up. Look it up online and you can find. Oh, did I just blow out the microphone? Yeah, so sometimes with certain, no, I have to wait. So with some emotional problems, they may be too deep or too complex or too overwhelming to be able to do it, work on our own, just sitting there on your meditation cushion. And so, yeah, it's fine to seek help from others like therapists to deal with those. But some problems, some emotional problems, we can manage on our own. Just feeling irritated with somebody who, didn't do something exactly the way you like it to be done, then that may not be too complex. You could do that on your own. So first, I'm going to talk about some general antidotes, general methods that we can use for any disturbing emotion. And then we can go into specific emotions that have specific antidotes. So one general antidote is mindfulness. And this term mindfulness is kind of complex. It can have different meanings. Even in Buddhism, the term mindfulness can have different meanings. But the sort of popular understanding of mindfulness, the way it's practiced now, like in mindfulness-based stress reduction, which has become very well known all over the world, I think. It's being aware of what's happening in the present. So many people are learning this. There's also apps you can get to help you learn it and practice it. And that is very helpful because much of the time our mind is not in the present. Our mind is thinking about the future, planning future activities, or thinking about the past, reliving past experiences. So much of the time we're not really paying attention to what's happening in the present moment. So that's a lack of mindfulness. So mindfulness helps us to be more aware of what's happening in this moment. And training in that, developing that ability, enables us to be aware of our inner world, our thoughts and our emotions, so that we're more likely to recognize if there's anger or there's jealousy or there's attachment or whatever disturbing emotion in our mind. Because again, we do need to recognize them. They are there in our mind. We all have them at certain moments. And if we don't recognize them and don't work with them, they're not going to go away by themselves. They'll just keep coming up again and again and might get bigger and worse. And eventually we might even start acting them out. So we do need to recognize and acknowledge disturbing emotions when they're in our mind. So developing mindfulness, or it could also be called self-awareness, is very helpful. And sometimes just that itself can be an effective antidote. I remember meeting a woman who, she was a mother of a 1-year-old child, and she learned mindfulness meditation, was practicing that regularly. And she said she noticed that she was becoming more patient, just, without even trying. She wasn't trying to be more patient, trying to be less angry, but she just found she was more calm and patient, like with her child. Having a 1-year-old child can be very challenging. But yeah, she just found it was affecting her in that way. Not reacting to things in this, with anger or irritation. So that itself, the development of mindfulness itself, enables us to notice, like, oh, there's anger or irritation starting to arise, and being able to deal with it before it grows and it becomes too big and then you're acting it out. Or just realizing, oh, it's not worth getting upset about. Yeah, being able to let go of that before it gets bigger. So that's one sort of general method that can be used. And then another is getting more familiar with what I was talking about before, the nature of the mind being like the sky, and then the thoughts and emotions being like clouds that come and go in the sky, that they're not permanent, they're not always there, they come and go. Another analogy that sometimes used is waves. The mind is like the ocean, and the thoughts and emotions are like waves that come up. So waves are not permanent. They come up and they immediately reabsorb into the sea. So just to get some sense that they're impermanent, transitory, coming and going rather than permanent. That's very, very helpful. Buddha talked a lot about impermanence, the impermanent nature of things. And it's enormously helpful. Very, very, very helpful. It's the true nature of things. It's the reality of things. It's the way things are. And yet we don't always recognize it. And so recognizing impermanence, how things are changing, every moment things are changing. They don't stay the same. And that's true of our inner world, our world of thoughts and emotions. Now, some people may find the idea of impermanence unsettling or frightening, or, that's not how I want things to be. So there are aspects of impermanence that are, disturbing. Like, we're getting old and we're all going to die one day. So we don't like that aspect of impermanence. But on the other hand, if things were not impermanent, if things were permanent and unchanging, that means we couldn't change. Thich Nhat Hanh, in one of his books, tells a story of, I think there was one of his students, a man who had some unhappiness about the whole idea of impermanence. He found it kind of depressing. And then I think his little girl said, "But Daddy, if things were not impermanent, I could never grow up." And if you think about it, if things were permanent rather than impermanent, everything would be frozen in exactly the way it is for all of time. And that would be awful. And that means suffering would be permanent. Suffering would exist forever. So, that's not something to be happy about. So the good side of impermanence is that we do change, we can change, and we are changing, whether we like it or not. So it's better to accept that and then work with impermanence. Use it in skillful ways. So remember the nature of the mind, the nature of thoughts and emotions. Let them come, let them go. Don't be attached to them, and don't overreact to them. They are not who we are. And also de-identify, learn to see them as just something in the mind rather than who I am, what I am. Another thing, another general kind of method, or I guess we can call it a method of dealing with disturbing emotions, is to realize you're not alone. You're not the only person in the world who has that kind of problem. I once met a woman who said when she started coming to Buddhist courses, she was really happy to hear about the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering, that everybody suffers, because in her life she'd had a lot of suffering. She suffered from depression, and she lived in a country and a culture where it was expected that you're always cheerful and showing a lot of friendliness and joy, even if you don't feel that way. And so she felt she had to hide her depression and not let people know that she was depressed, not show it or talk about it. And so when she learned that Buddha said that everybody has suffering, I'm not the only one. That was very helpful for her. So it's the same with our disturbing emotions: anger, attachment, jealousy. Everybody has these except Buddha, but ordinary beings, us ordinary beings in the world who are not yet enlightened, we all have these disturbing emotions. Some may have them more than others. Some may have more anger, some have less anger, some may have more jealousy, some less, but we all do have them. And just having that awareness can be very helpful, so that you don't feel alone and you don't feel like I'm the worst person in the world because I feel this way. It's very helpful to recall when you are going through some kind of problem, whether it's an emotional problem or a physical problem, any kind of problem we may have. What happens, I see this in myself, and when I talk about it, I see people nodding. So I think it's pretty common. What can happen when we're going through a problem, we may feel I'm the only one in the world who has a problem like this. I don't think we deliberately think that way. I think it's just something that happens in our mind, a habit, a tendency. And you might even look around and look at other people and think, oh, they look so happy. They look so relaxed. Everything's fine with them. I'm the only one who's got a problem, who's suffering. So that kind of reaction in the mind just makes things worse. Because on top of this problem that you have, which is already causing you a lot of unhappiness, then you feel cut off from others, almost like you are on an island all by yourself, miserable, and everybody else is over there having a great time. Everything's going well for them. So you feel more alone, more disconnected from others and from the world, and that exacerbates the suffering. So you might just get more deeply absorbed into yourself and into your problem, into your suffering, which just makes things worse. And it's totally untrue. It's just not true at all that you are the only one who has this problem. So it's very helpful to think about that, to think, I'm not the only one who's got this problem, whether it's anger, whether it's cancer or a broken leg or whatever the problem may be, relationship problem, you are definitely not alone. There's lots of other people who have that kind of problem too. So it can be very helpful to think about that. It will take away that feeling of being alone and isolated and cut off from the rest of humanity, the rest of sentient beings. You feel connected with others. And it is also a way to feel more compassion, to grow your compassion. Compassion is knowing that others suffer and being concerned about their suffering, wanting to help them. So compassion is one of the most beautiful, wonderful, positive states of mind that we have. We want to grow that. We need to grow that. It's part of the path to enlightenment, but it's also really good for us. They've done studies on compassion and found lots of benefits of compassion. So it's a good state of mind to have. So we want to grow it. And one way to grow it is, realizing that other people suffer too, just like me. I'm not alone. And then that can also lead to wanting to learn how to manage this problem, this whatever it is, so that you can be more helpful to others who have that kind of problem too. So that's like I was saying with anger, learning to work with my anger has helped me to be with other people who are angry, not run away from them, not be afraid of anger, and to be able to reach out and help people with their anger. So we can transform difficult situations like disturbing emotions or any problem we have. We can transform it and make it part of our practice, part of our path, part of our work to care about and benefit others. Also, another thing that happens is if we focus on our own problem and feel as if we're the only one in the world who has this problem, we can get obsessed with it. I think this just happens naturally. We kind of obsess with this problem. And that causes the problem to seem bigger and worse than it really is. Like this expression we have in English, making a mountain out of a molehill. Yeah, molehill is just a little mound. So obsessing about a problem makes it seem really huge. And then it seems like overwhelming and I can't manage. I can't deal with this. It's too much for me. Whereas if we remember, we're not the only one who has a problem like this. Other people have problems like this too. And also, probably some people have worse problems than you do. I I remember once I was struggling with anger. I was feeling a lot of anger, and it was really, really hard to deal with. And it was around that time that there was this horrible genocide happening in Rwanda. The Hutus and the Tutsis were slaughtering each other. And I thought about that, and I thought, wow, my anger is nothing compared to that. And yeah, so it also made me feel grateful that I knew methods for working on anger. And here were people who didn't know how to deal with their anger and were just acting it out and slaughtering their neighbors. So why did I mention that? Yeah, oh yeah, just just seeing that whatever problem you have, there are probably others who have it worse. So I thought the anger I have isn't as bad as their anger. So that helped me to realize, to see it in perspective and realize, oh, it's not that bad and I can manage it. So whatever problem we may be experiencing, there are most probably many other people, maybe millions of other people who are experiencing worse problems than oneself. So then your problem can shrink. It seems smaller and more manageable. And then, yeah, it gives you confidence to be able to work on it. I can do this. I can work on this. It's not that bad. And if I can learn how to deal with my problem, then I can be in a better position to help others with theirs. So I've talked quite a bit already. How about we do a little meditation on some of these things I've talked about to see how they can be utilized. So make yourselves comfortable. But whether you're sitting cross-legged or you're sitting on a chair, try to keep your back straight. That helps the mind be more awake, alert, and focused. It's also important to be relaxed, not tight or tense, so that your shoulders relax. Take a few moments to let your mind, your awareness settle in your body. Let your breathing be natural. Let the breath flow in and out in a natural way, not trying to control it or manipulate it in any way. Now bring to mind a disturbing emotion that you sometimes feel. It could be anger or jealousy or fear or depression. Can you think of times when you do not have that particular emotion in your mind, times when you're free of it? can you think of times when you have even the opposite state of mind? Like instead of anger, you feel love. Instead of fear or anxiety, you feel confidence. So can you recognize that that emotion, that disturbing emotion isn't something permanent, a permanent part of you, of your mind, but something that comes and goes like clouds in the sky? Think of a clear sky free of clouds, pollution, airplanes, just vast, pure, pristine. Buddhism says the real nature of our mind is similar to that. It's pure. Disturbing thoughts and emotions are not always there, but come and go like clouds and pollution. Do you ever get mad at yourself or feel self-critical when disturbing emotions do arise in your mind? And if that does happen, is it helpful? Is it a good way to solve the problem? And does it make sense that just as we need to have compassion and kindness and patience for others, we need to feel that way towards ourselves as well? And one reason self-criticalness happens is because of the tendency to identify with the emotion as if it's me. But as we already saw, emotions are transitory, like clouds in the sky. They come and go. So they're not who we are, what we are. And it can be helpful to learn to say to yourself, anger, or whatever the emotion is, anger is in my mind rather than I am angry. And when you do have this disturbing emotion, do you feel as if you're the only person in the world who has it? It might seem like that when you're totally caught up in it. But is it true? So if we think about it, we should easily understand there are many other people in the world who have that emotion as well. And some of those people may have it even more than you do, or even worse than you do. And now see if you can understand that if you can learn how to work on that emotion in yourself, learn to manage it and even transform it, then you will be in a better position to help others who have this problem. So to conclude the meditation, see if you can feel the wish, the aspiration to learn more about that disturbing emotion, learn how to work on it, and do more work on it so that you can be of more benefit to others who suffer from it as well. So there's one more kind of general way of working with disturbing emotions that I'll talk about. And that is what I call doing a reality check. So whenever we feel any kind of emotion, whether it's a negative one or a positive one, there's always certain thoughts or concepts involved in that. So in the West, there's been this tendency, I don't know if it's still the case now, but this tendency to separate thoughts and emotions as if they're totally different things, not connected at all. But according to Buddhism, that isn't the case. There's thoughts connected with our emotions. And in the case of disturbing emotions like anger, most, if not all, of the thoughts involved with that are unrealistic, distorted, seeing things in a distorted way. And so one way of dealing with them is to kind of take a step back from our thoughts and look at them, like look at what my mind is saying when I'm angry, or when I have jealousy, or when I have depression. What kind of thoughts are going on in the mind? And then ask myself, are these realistic? Am I seeing things accurately or not? So, for example, with anger, when we're angry at somebody, usually our anger is at another person or a being, and like an animal, but not so much at inanimate things like machines. So when we're angry at another person, what happens in the mind is seeing that person as 100% bad. Like our mind is painting a picture of that person as someone who's totally 100% bad, negative, doesn't have any good qualities, doesn't do anything good. I don't think we do this deliberately, consciously. It's just an automatic, it's part of anger. That's just what anger does. And in fact, the Dalai Lama tells a story of speaking with one American psychologist. I think his name is Aaron Beck. And he did a lot of research on anger and hatred. I think he was kind of doing research on criminals, people who do really violent things. And his conclusion was that when we're angry at somebody and we see that person as 100% bad, 90% of that is projected by our own mind. Only 10%, even that may not be true, but 10% is there, but 90% is projected by our mind. And the Dalai Lama said he was really delighted when he heard this, because he said, oh yeah, this is what Buddhism says. This is what Nagarjuna, great Buddhist master, said. So it's confirmed by this psychologist. So yeah, so this is what happens when we are angry or have hatred for someone. We see them as 100% bad. But is that true? Most people don't even check. They just go along with what their mind says, as if it must be true because I think so. It must be true because my mind tells me that. So this is the tendency we have. We just believe in whatever our mind tells us. So Buddhism says, wait a minute, is your mind always right? Does your mind see things accurately? So take another look. So there was one time when I got very annoyed at this person that I was working with because she sometimes behaved kind of like a spoiled child. You know, when she didn't get her way, she'd sort of throw a tantrum. And even though she was, I don't know, in her 50s, you know, she behaved like that. And everybody would sort of, you know, oh yeah, we have to do what she wants and so on. And I got really annoyed about that. So so I was kind of feeling angry at her for a while. And then I realized that my mind was ignoring all the good things she had done. This person had done a lot of really, really good things, including good things for myself. She'd been really, really kind and helpful and generous with me. And so it was so clear that my mind just kind of threw all that aside and only focused on this one aspect of her behavior that I didn't like. And it's like, blew that up as if that was all there was to the person. It's a little bit like, these cartoons they do of kind of political cartoons where they'll take a political leader and maybe that person has a big nose. So they draw, a cartoon of that person kind of really small with this enormous nose. It's like they, exaggerate one aspect of that person or huge ears. So this is what our mind can do. It's like focusing on one thing about the person or two things maybe that we don't like and then exaggerating that, and that's all that we can see. And so it can be really helpful to, like I say, step back from our mind and take another look. What is my mind saying about this person? And is it true? What my mind is saying about that person, is it true? Even if it is true, okay, maybe this person, does behave like a spoiled child sometimes, but is that all there is? Yeah, there's a lot more than that. There's a lot of good things, a lot of good qualities. So this can be very helpful in dealing with anger and dealing with jealousy and dealing with attachment, because attachment is the same. When we have attachment, desire, greed towards, again, it can be a person or it can be some object that we want, a certain kind of car, a certain kind of phone. So what happens, we'll talk more about that later when I get to attachment, but it's just part of the nature of attachment to exaggerate certain qualities about that person or about that object that we find attractive and pleasing, and then maybe blow those up, exaggerate them, and ignore anything else that may not be so good. So we know that from falling in love with somebody, there's certain things about that person you really like and you're going to focus on those and that's all there is. And then your mind just gets carried away with fantasies like, oh, if I could only have a relationship with that person, it would be so wonderful. We would live happily ever after, like in the fairy tales, and there wouldn't be any problems at all. And we know that's not true, but when you're young, you're a teenager or early 20s, you don't realize that. You just get carried away with these fantasies, and then you find out it's not true. You find out the hard way. So yeah, so this tendency of our mind to distort what's there, exaggerate certain qualities, ignore or deny other qualities, and not see things in a very realistic way. This is a little harder to do than some of the other methods, but it's very, very helpful. I was thinking, like, right now, there's probably a lot of people who are angry at Russia. And when we're feeling angry, annoyed, hateful towards Russia, it may seem as if the whole of Russia, every person, everything about Russia is bad, nothing good at all. It seems like that when we don't think, we don't check carefully. But if we think about it, if we do some research, we'll find out, no, that's not the case. There's lots of people there who are really kind and compassionate, and they're opposed to the war, and they're even trying to put an end to it and trying to help people and relieve suffering and so on and so forth. There are good people and good things going on there. And even Putin, now you may say, oh, it's, okay, lots of good Russian people, but Putin, oh, he's awful. But I don't know that much about Putin, but he probably has some good qualities too, and has done some good things. And like apparently he has dogs that he loves. He's very loving and affectionate with his dogs and his family. He must have family and friends that he loves and cares for and shows affection for. So even a person who may be doing a lot of negative things and creating a lot of suffering, if we look more carefully, we will find positive things. Because according to Buddhism, nobody is 100% bad. Nobody is totally devoid of good qualities. Everybody has good qualities. Everybody has Buddha nature. That's very much a teaching in Buddhism. The nature of our mind, the pure nature of our mind is there in everyone. And just a question of getting in touch with it, learning how to develop it, learning how to overcome the obstacles, the things that hinder it. And one day, Buddhism says, one day we will all become Buddhas, just like the Buddha, without any negative qualities at all, with only positive qualities. So anyway, that's a way of working with our emotions by looking at the thoughts, the concepts, what our mind is thinking, what our mind is saying about the object of our anger, our attachment, our jealousy, or whatever. And recognizing that at least some of what our mind is saying is inaccurate and maybe exaggerated and distorted. So we're not seeing things in a realistic way. So those are some ways of working with emotions in general. And then when we'll have a break now, we come back, I'll start talking about specific emotions and how to work with them. Anger is my favorite. It's really juicy. Well, I have a lot of it, that's for one thing. So I've had a lot of experience with anger, but it's so interesting. And it's also so destructive if we don't know how to work with it, how to deal with it. It can be very harmful, very destructive. So we'll stop there. And yeah, if you have questions, you can send them in. And I'll do my best to answer them later. So let's make a mental dedication of the positive energy, the merit we've created so far in this last 2 hours. We started with a positive, altruistic motivation. And then we spent this time listening and learning how to work with our mind, how to transform our mind. So this has been a good thing. We've created some good energy, what we call merit in Buddhism, which is the source of happiness and spiritual growth. So the best thing we can do with this positive energy is to share it with others. So let's mentally share this merit, this positive energy, wishing it will bring peace and happiness, well-being to all living beings, help them be free of all their suffering, help all of us get closer to enlightenment. Okay, so we have a half an hour break, and then we'll meet again at 9:30 our time.
It's 6:30 our time. Thank you very much. It's 6:30 at our time.
6:30, okay.